Hey guys, hope you're all having a great day. So today, in the middle of January, when the high today is not going to get out of the teens, I'm just urging to do something related to gardening. And the perfect thing to do in January when you have hopefully a little more time on your hands and not super busy with a lot of stuff going on outside is to start some winter sowing seeds. So that's the project that we're going to be working on today, and I want to show you this step-by-step process because it may not be something you've heard before, but it's super worth it in the end if you do it, and it's actually really, really easy. So just to begin, I want to talk about the materials that you would need in order to do this project, and then we'll go over the seeds and I'll show you the entire process. So the first thing that you're going to need is a plastic milk jug. This is going to be the greenhouse for the plants. And what this does is, you can see that I've already used this for a year. This is actually the second year that I've done this. But all you really have to do with this plastic milk jug is you can cut it around halfway. You can see where it's cut and where like some of the duct tape is left over at the end. And then it can open up this way. But you can see kind of where the handle is on this container. I left it there so it's kind of like a hinge. It's easier to have it all in one piece. You certainly can cut it all the way off if you'd like to, or I have another container over there which actually broke off just because I already had used them, had been handled, whatever. But you can still use them even if they're in two pieces. I just like to have it like this to make it a little bit easier. And then the other important thing is you need holes at the bottom. So you can just get like a knife or some other sharp object and just poke. I did 4 holes in the bottom of each one of them, but you just want to make sure that water doesn't settle at the bottom. So just good drainage is good. And this is all you really need to get started. I also don't leave the caps on, and the reason why is because these are going to be sitting outside, and you would like them to get at least a little bit of rainwater, or even snow in the elements if you are in a cold enough place for snow. So it helps, and it also helps them not get too hot, especially in the springtime when temperatures get to be in like the 60s, 70 degrees, and this creates the greenhouse effect. It actually could get really hot in here, so having good airflow from the top is going to help that heat escape. The next thing you're going to need is some potting soil, and make sure that you use potting soil over anything else because these will react the same way that pots are, and you want a nice fluffy mix of soil that's not going to compact too much. So you don't want to use like raised bed mix or in-ground soil or anything like that. I'm using Pro Mix because I think that this is a really good mix to use. I've had a lot of success with it, but pretty much any type of potting mix will work just fine. Next, I have a bowl and a shovel, and that's because I have to wet that soil because it's been downstairs in the basement with the bag open. A lot of the moisture has left that soil, so we just have to rehydrate it just so that way it's moist, not soaking wet, but it'll help with these seeds to get started. So I'm going to be mixing it in this bowl, and then off to the side over here, I also have a watering can, so I'm just going to be using that, and I'm going to mix the soil like one container at a time, pretty much, so that way that's all started. Next thing you'll need is duct tape, and the reason why is we're going to be taping up this open part that you would have cut on the container, and this will help hold it in place. It also helps keep them a little bit more like together, so that way there's not a chance of it like blowing open or anything like that, and it helps keep that greenhouse effect going. So it's best to have that more in the winter time. I also have a Sharpie that I'm going to be using. Now, I did have a little bit of trouble with this last year with keeping the labels well, so that way I could know what I was growing in each container. You can actually maybe still see a little bit of what was left on here. So I think I ended up marking it on the container and on the duct tape and maybe even something inside. And because the outside of this is so exposed to the weather, and especially if you just use like a regular Sharpie and not like a garden marker or anything that's supposed to be able to weather the elements a bit better, it'll end up just kind of wearing off. So the next thing that I would recommend using is some sort of tag or something that you can label with on the inside. So these are just little wooden labels, and I actually wrote with them on pencil because marker tends to bleed on this and pen doesn't really write on here. So whatever really works for you. The plastic ones are probably a little bit better than the wood actually because then you can write on marker, but I'm gonna try that for this year, and at least since that's on the inside, it'll be less weathered than everything on the outside. But I'll still label the duct tape on the outside. Hopefully that'll last for the majority of the season, and then we have the inside. So I'd recommend just label it in like maybe a couple different places in case one of them ends up wiping away. And then you'll know what's in each container. All right, and then the last thing is obviously going to be your seeds. So something that this is really awesome to do with the winter sowing would be if you would like to grow perennials from seed. That's mainly what I did last year. I started a lot of perennials from seed. In fact, this oriental poppy, these seeds were actually from the winter sowing last year, and I didn't end up using all of them. And it's great to start things, especially if they need more of the colder temperatures in order to get started. But I actually am doing more annuals this year than I am perennials, but the majority of them are going to be more cold season stuff. But I have oriental poppies, which I'm going to do a few more of this year because I really liked those plants last year, even with just the leaf texture, and I'd love to have poppies in a couple different parts of our yard. I also have I have a couple different varieties of sweet pea. So there's the Sweet Dreams mixed colors, as well as High Scent, and you can see these are annuals, but they're more of a cold crop annual, so I think that they'll be better off being in the winter sowing containers because hopefully they can start growing a little bit sooner versus just starting them outside once it gets warm enough. So we got those two, this variety, and then the High Scent, which is more of like a whitish purple color flower. We have California poppies. These are like a nice bright orange color, so another type of poppy, but definitely different from the oriental. We have Swiss chard, which is actually obviously a vegetable. It's just more of an experiment, but I kind of want to use this more for decorative purposes than I want to use it for eating. But nonetheless, we can still transplant it to the garden if we would like to. And then the last thing is Lady Lavender. This is a smaller variety of lavender. This is a perennial. I think it says it's a zone 6 through 9 actually, 6 through 9. So this actually says to start it indoors, but I figured one thing I could do is start it through winter sowing and see how that works. But we would love to do a small hedge of lavender where we would need a decent amount of plants. But I figured I might as well just try growing them from seed just to see how it works. And I feel like in the end it is so much it's so much more of a reward to start stuff from seed and to say, I started that from this tiny little thing and look at what it's become now. It's really how I felt with the perennials that I started from seed last year and that are going to come back and bloom this year. I also started some other stuff like columbine. I'll link those other videos for the videos that I did make on the winter sowing from last year if you're interested to see what I grew, and also interested to see what more of like a final product looks like. But I will be making an update once I do finish this as well with these plants, once I'm ready to transplant them. So besides that, I'm going to show you an example of one of them. I'm going to put one of them together, and then I'll just do the rest of them, and that'll be pretty much it. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is to be pre-moistening this soil. So I'm just going to be grabbing this, and it's really, really dry. So we're going to want to keep this moist. And basically the best way to moisten soil is to add water to it and mix it up together until you can squeeze it and it forms a clump of soil in your hand, but it's not dripping out of your hand. You can squeeze it hard and the water's not dripping out. That's a really good indicator to tell that you have moist but not too wet of soil. We'll add some water. And I'd say try to add not enough water at first, and then you can add more as you go. Because if you add too much soil to the container, then obviously it'll be harder to mix. So just do it as best as you can, but make sure that it's not too wet because you don't want to soak the seeds too much. All right, so this looks pretty good, and you can see that if I grab a clump of this soil, you can see it clumps in my hand, it stays together pretty well, but it's not dripping when I squeeze it. And it looks like Freddy's joined us on the table. So if you haven't met my cat, Freddy, here he is. So the next thing after pre-moistening the soil is obviously just adding it to the container. Now, we're gonna be filling it up about 3/4 of the way. Freddy, I'm gonna have to ask you to move, or you can just join us. So fill it up about 3/4 of the way. I also would recommend press it down a little bit so that way it gets into the sides and everything, but don't press it down too much because you still want the soil to be a little bit lofty. And the reason you don't want to fill this up all of the way is because you still want room to be able to water the plants and you don't want it to overflow on the side. So this looks pretty good. I left a little bit of soil in the pot so that way we can top it off. And then all you have to do is follow the instructions for the seeds. So this says, sow seeds thinly and evenly and barely cover with fine soil. It also says seedlings emerge in 10 to 20 days at 55 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So these aren't going to germinate until the container is in between 55 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So planting these in January, obviously nothing's gonna happen. However, it also will probably be a little bit warmer in these containers than it is outside because of the greenhouse effect. So my guess would be that these will probably start germinating maybe in around March, and I think that's about when they did last year. The other important thing about placing seeds is that you want to put the seeds in kind of groups, because if you just put them over the entire thing, which is what I ended up doing last year, they become really hard to separate. And I remember having like 30, 40 plants in one little tiny container, and they were all intermixed together. Versus if you can kind of put them in groups, then you can at least have like maybe like 5 groups of plants, and they're a little bit easier to manage, and then maybe you could just thin them out to like the best one plant after like later in the season. But that's typically what works best. So I am going to take these seeds. You can see that these Oriental poppy seeds are incredibly small, and I have dirty fingers, but I can still grab these seeds. And I'm just gonna do a grouping of them in the middle, some in this corner, this corner, this corner, and this corner. You don't need to do the entire seed packet if there are a ton of seeds. For example, in each group, there was probably anywhere between 5 and 10 seeds, and that should be enough. You really don't need to put a crazy amount, but I would say do a decent amount, and you can always thin them out. Seeds are typically not too expensive, so you really only need maybe 1 packet per container. And then because it said to barely cover them, I'm just gonna do a thin layer of soil, not anything crazy, and just very lightly tap everything. So at this time, before you put the duct tape on, make sure that you have some sort of tag or label for the container, because you want to make sure that you know which one you're doing. And then just stick it inside. So I'll just put that right there. And I put it away from one of the clumps so that way I can still kind of see it and I'm not going to disturb any of the plants. Now, with the duct tape, I had a little bit of trouble with it sticking last year, and I think it's because of the texture that they use on this container. So some containers might work better than others, but as long as you wrap the duct tape around maybe like twice in total and just have it nice and tight around there, it should hold pretty well. So I got it around there once, but just to be safe, I'm gonna put it around a second time. And I'm also gonna label it on the roll of duct tape first, because that actually makes it a little bit easier. So this is the Oriental Poppy, and this is Brilliant Red. All right, so that's pretty much it. You can see it's holding in place pretty well, but I still would support it by the bottom just so that way you don't have any issues with it or nothing like this. And this is actually ready to go outside. What I also did too is I put them in a more south-facing area so that way they got a decent amount of sun and could stay pretty warm throughout the winter. Freddie is running back and forth. And they should be pretty good to go besides that. So now I'm just gonna take care of the rest of these containers and we should be all set. So right here is actually the south-facing side of our house, so they actually will get some radiant heat off of the house, and that will keep these nice and warm. But they're just gonna stay in here, and I'm just gonna check on them periodically, maybe every couple of weeks. And then as they need water, I will water them. But to be honest, what I did last year, they really didn't need water until it started to get really warm, maybe until April or May, and they really didn't need to be watered until they started growing as well. I'm in a pretty wet climate being in the Northeast here, so we tend to get quite a bit of precipitation in the winter and spring. But if you don't get a lot of precipitation in your area, it might be a good idea to check every few days, once a week, that type of stuff. And as spring goes on, maybe even once a day would be best. So this is pretty much all you have to do. And I will make a follow-up video on what to do once these really start growing. But for now, they can just sit. So that's pretty much all I have for you in this video. If you guys have any questions, comments, feel free to let me know down in the comment section down below. And besides that, I hope you like this video, and I'll see you in the next one.